Well, in Asia, North Korea fired an intermediate-range ballistic missile over Japan for the first time in 5 years. Evacuation notices were issued and train services were suspended. That's what you're hearing there. In 22 minutes, the missile managed to fly 2,800 miles over northern Japan before falling into the Pacific Ocean. And the nuclear weapon was reportedly capable of reaching the U.S. territory of Guam and even further. In response to this latest escalation, the United States and Japan held joint military drills over the Sea of Japan. Well, joining me now to discuss all this is the author of The Coming Collapse of China and the Great U.S.-China Tech War, Gordon Chang. Gordon, welcome to the show. It's good to see you. All right, a lot of concern over why you see Kim Jong-un doing this. You know, he hasn't used these type of military tactics in some time. So what changed? Why now? What is he getting at?
First of all, the North Koreans need to validate the designs of their missiles. I mean, they had the moratorium during the Trump administration. They need to actually test. And that's why we've seen this accelerated testing schedule this year. This was the 23rd launch of a missile since the beginning of the year. The other thing that they need to do is they need to show to the Iranians and other customers that their missiles actually work. So this is sort of like a sales pitch. And you know, in these circumstances, Lindsay, every time the North Korean launches a missile, you know, we may not know the particular reason for why it occurs, but we know it's not a good sign.
Yeah, definitely not a good sign at all. I do want to switch gears to China. They came out this week and said that the U.S. should be concerned about nuclear war. This is coming from the Global Times, which is a state-owned media outlet, as you know. I mean, what does this tell us ultimately? Because it seems like what President Xi, China's president, is trying to say here is, hey, this is the U.S. and the West's fault. This is not Putin's fault, this war. You guys should let up and not be helping Ukraine. Do I have that right? Is that the kind of messaging they're sending internally?
Well, certainly that's the message that China is sending. And the other thing, here what China is doing is actually amplifying Vladimir Putin's threats to use the world's most destructive weapons. And that's a real sign of partnership. You know, a lot of people have said, oh, you know, the Chinese are embarrassed by the Russian war effort. Well, maybe they are, but the point is that they're supporting Putin to the hilt, and they're actually amplifying his threats. So that's a real sign of partnership.
You know, the interesting thing is, I mean, China hasn't come out ever and denounced this. This is almost the most vocal that we've seen from the state media paper, where they're showing their alliance with this, really taking the rhetoric from Putin that we heard from him on Friday, that this is the West's fault, ultimately giving them credence if they do go nuclear, that it's the U.S. fault, that they had the right to do it. What should the U.S. response be in all this? Because ultimately, I feel like China has gotten off the hook. They haven't been held responsible for supporting this war in Ukraine.
Well, we should be imposing sanctions on China. Now, China's been providing military assistance to Russia in this war effort. It's open source reporting. Now, the Biden administration keeps on saying, you know, China, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that with regard to the war, and China just blows us off. So I think that the important thing here is for the Biden administration to show some will and actually start to make China hurt over these things. Because if we don't do that, we are going to see China actually provide even more assistance to Russia in the Ukraine war.
I want to get your take on this before we let you go, because the U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, he said that Ukraine's NATO bid should be taken up at a different time. Obviously, this is after Volodymyr Zelensky has tried to fast track his NATO application. Do you agree? Should it be taken up at a different time? And this is why Putin wanted the war in the first place. He doesn't want Ukraine to be a part of NATO.
Yeah, I disagree. You know, I understand when people say that admitting Ukraine at this time is a bad idea because they're already involved in a war. But, you know, that type of thinking has gotten us into this position in the first place. And if we don't do something dramatic, then Vladimir Putin is going to continue, and he probably will use his nukes. So I'm not saying that anything will work, but I am saying, though, that what we've been doing hasn't worked. And if we continue doing what hasn't worked, we're going to the worst outcome.
Gordon Chang, good to see you this evening. Thanks for your insights.
Thank you, Lindsay.